Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel, Kalynn. Today it's time for another reading wrap-up. Sorry there hasn't been one of these in a little while. Last weekend, instead of making videos, I decided to go to a Renaissance festival for the first time in 15 years. It was very fun. I'm glad I went. But that's why there weren't videos for a while. So yeah, today I have 9 books to talk about, so let's get into it. First up, I did read Halfbuilt Garden by Ruthanna Emrys. I had quite a few thoughts on that, more than I thought I was going to, so I'm going to cut that out and it will be in a separate video out soon. But basically this is a near future science fiction story about first contact with a pair of symbiotic alien species that arrive on Earth to basically try to convince humans to abandon their planet, go live out in space on built habitats and not be restricted and threatened by the confines of an environment on a planet, which might end up killing them because of, you know, what we're doing to the planet. I really enjoyed the topics and themes of this, which I'll talk about more in my separate review. It's exactly my kind of science fiction. The only downside to me reading this was just the way in which I read it. I never quite got in a groove with the book because I was reading it on my phone in very short bursts in different places. I don't typically do that. Anyway, I did really enjoy this, and yeah, we'll talk about that more in a future video. Next up is A Poisonous Review by Nancy Warren. This is the 4th and latest book in the Vampire Book Club series, set in the same world as her Vampire Knitting Club series. It is very, very cozy, low-stakes, supernatural mystery. This particular one, not my favorite. The plot focuses a lot on the existence of leprechauns and their mischief. There is a murder mystery, and Quinn and Lachlan, you know, try to solve it and everything. I really wasn't into the leprechaun thing. I don't know why. So this was fine, but for me, it was just like the weakest in the series so far. What I did really enjoy in it though is that this series seems to be really leaning into the friendship between Quinn and Lachlan. Perhaps there is still like a romantic interest building between them, but it still seems to be quite definitely this platonic friendship, and they've become quite trusting of each other, and I really like that. I like seeing how these characters have been like leaning on each other in the mystery investigations and all of that. It's really good to see that. So yeah, I'll continue reading the series, but for now I am caught up with it. Next is this big, shiny book. This is Dinosaurs and Other Prehistoric Life. It is written by Anusuya Chinsamy-Turan and it is illustrated by Angela Riza and Daniel Long. This is a DK Books publication on science. It's this nice, hefty book, and it is heavily illustrated, and it's all about different fossils and species and stuff from throughout history. I picked this up when I was at the Field Museum in Chicago. I really, really love the dinosaur exhibit there. I might be coming late to my dinosaur phase. I never had one as a child. So yeah, I just loved this book when I saw it in the gift shop, so I had to buy it, and it's so pretty, and I had just never really read that much about dinosaurs or any sort of prehistoric life before, so I really enjoyed this. This is definitely aimed at younger audiences. I would say it's like middle grade reading level, but just as quick descriptions of things and lots of pictures of the actual fossils and everything, it was very enjoyable for the trivia. I think there are other books in the series and on different topics, and I might have to get more of them because they're so very pretty. But yeah, highly, highly enjoyed this. Now we're about to have a streak of books that I didn't enjoy nearly that much. So we have This Wicked Fate by Kalynn Bayron. This is actually a real disappointment for me because you may have remembered that last month I was raving about the first book in this duology called This Poisoned Heart, and I still stand by that. This Poisoned Heart was a great book. I super enjoyed it, but the conclusion to this duology, This Wicked Fate, it never got off the ground. The first book, there were a lot of mysteries, there was a lot of excitement and discovery as the main character is kind of exploring her plant magic, learning more about her birth family and the secrets that they had. It was so cool. And the second one, it's supposed to be a quest. Go do this thing in X amount of time to save a person. And I was expecting it to be this real adventure. They have to go somewhere, they have to travel, and they're gonna encounter more crazy things. And I kid you not, the characters did not leave home until halfway through the book. Like almost all of the time that they're given to complete this quest goes by before they even set out the door. And yeah, there are kind of reasons for that, but it felt like it was this artificial constraint to like waste time in the first half of the story so there would be like this time pressure at the end, but it made everything feel extremely unrealistic at the end because everything conveniently falls into the character's laps so that they can achieve this thing in like 4 days. And I was like, they didn't actually have to try that hard. They just went from here to here and just happened to immediately find the right place, talk to the right people, remember that they had this clue for 20 years that's suddenly relevant. I'm like, really? They did this thing that people have been trying to figure out for possibly 1,000 years, and they just did it all in like under a month. I can't. So I was very disappointed in the plot of this one, even if I still found the world building and the magic to be very interesting. I also think that like this is YA fantasy and it's got a style and a target audience that's different from what I typically read, so I'm not going to fault this book too much. But the story goes into territory with like mysteries of gods and deities and the mystique of all of that. What does it mean to interact with long lost gods and everything? I felt there's like going to be, what's the word? Ineffable, like an ineffable quality about this. Like there was going to be some time spent thinking about what encounters with deities and stuff would mean, what all of the mythos of this world actually meant. And I felt like characters spent one sentence thinking about it and then went back to the mundane. I was like, we could have talked about this a little bit. And I think that just like the pace of the story, the writing style, it just never dwelt on things with any, I want to say like lyricism. There could have been more beauty and more thought-provoking stuff in this, and it just skimmed over that to get to something else. What a disappointment. Not a bad book, but it definitely did not live up to what I was expecting after the great beginning in this Poison Heart. Next up is Stuck With You by Ali Hazelwood. This is the second in her Steminist novellas series. And I haven't read the first or the third. I just read this one because my hold at the library came in first. I think they're all pretty standalone. I have very little to say about this except that it is becoming very obvious to me that everything that Ali Hazelwood has published so far is the same romance, just different character names and different lengths. I still stand by my love for The Love Hypothesis, which is her first novel, and the fact that her second one, Love on the Brain, was also good, but definitely a repeat. I just can't take much more of it. Like, if you binge read her stories one after the other, it becomes obvious they are all the same story, and I just find that kind of irritating. Anyway, next is In Defense of Witches, The Legacy of the Witch Hunts and Why Women Are Still on Trial by Chollet. This is translated from French by Sophie R. Lewis. So I read this for a book chat with some friends that hasn't happened yet, so I actually haven't put my thoughts in order that much about this book, but it's a non-fiction feminist text. The title and the introduction set it up to be this real analysis of what the image of the witch means in culture and what the history of witch hunts meant for basically the attack on women throughout history. So the title and the introduction are really saying one thing, And then that whole premise kind of gets abandoned for the rest of the book. And it's very like scattershot. This is like just this almost like random collection of things that Mona Chollet wants to say about what irritates her about misogyny. And certainly there are good points brought up in this, but it just felt like this hodgepodge of quotations that she wanted to share, her own experiences that she wanted to throw into the mix, and ranting about how unfair some things are, about like the things that women have to endure. And I'm like, all this is a good point, but it wasn't organized very well. I felt like there was this thesis statement made at the beginning, which the rest of the book kind of ignores. And yeah, so I can't really fault it for the ideas, because I actually think that there are valid points made, even though they're the same points that have been made in any other feminist text. It just could have been written better and organized better, and this twist of viewing it through the lens of the witch could have been much more interesting and taken to more lengths than it actually was. So, meh. So anyway, moving on to the last couple of things that I did enjoy more. We have Given Volume 1 by Natsuki Kizu. This is a BL or boys love manga about young men in a band who may have interest in each other. Wow, that was a terrible description. Basically, one of the main characters, a high school student, asks one of his basically classmates to teach him how to play guitar. Classmate is in a band, so they're now all in a band and they have feelings for each other. This first volume is a lot of setup. It's the character introductions and the basic premise established, but it hasn't gotten into the meat of the story. So I didn't find it super interesting. I think that this genre, BL manga, especially at this age, not really my thing, because it's also very much about music, like being in a band. That's never been a buzzword for me, so I didn't super love that either. However, like, I think I might give it a chance. I think I'm going to read another volume or two and see how it goes once the story really gets going, and I'll determine what I think about it then. So yeah, I'm glad I tried it. And then we have 2 5-star reads back to back. What is this? I read Witch Hat Atelier Volume 9. This is by Kamome Shirahama, and I love this series. It's been getting progressively better and better and better for me, and this volume was fantastic. And I'm trying to think about why. I think it's because this volume doesn't have many of the cutesy little girl adventures in it. It's like full on into the mysteries and the intrigues and the dangers of this world. It continues with introducing some really interesting characters and more politics in the world, but it's also continuing the storylines that have been introduced with like the brimmed caps and the forbidden magic. The stakes seem to have gone up a little bit higher by the end of this volume. I'm just really, really into it. So I think the story and the characters are pretty fantastic. The artwork is amazing. It was just great. I really regret not owning the manga series because while I was reading this, I realized I should probably have reread the last couple of volumes to refresh my memory on plot threads. It came back to me, but I was like, I really want to reread this again. So at some point I may have to like either get them all from the library again or start like collecting the series. I'm just very, very picky about which manga and comics I buy because they're so expensive. And the last thing that I have to talk about is the thing I finished reading about 30 minutes ago, and that is A Strange and Sudden Endurance by Meadows. This is a fantasy romance with some pretty like dark edges to it. I loved it. I've never read anything by Meadows before. Her other fantasy, which I suspect may be set in the same world, have never really grabbed my attention. But this one, the way that it was pitched to me by a friend, I was like, well, fantasy romance, complex politics, arranged marriage, that sounds interesting. I freaking loved it. What is it with me? Like, I've been on this like queer fantasy romance binge over the last couple of weeks, and 2 of my 5-star reads of this year have been fantasy romances. I can't really explain this. So basically this story is set, it's secondary world fantasy, so it's an entirely invented world where some level of magic exists, but it's not hugely prevalent in the world. How do I sum up the story briefly? Because there's a lot going on here because of events, relationships, politics, social norms and taboos. Basically, it's an arranged marriage story where the youngest son of a nobleman in one country, Velison, is arranged to be married to the child of a foreign nobleman for reasons, for alliance purposes. Only Velison is gay, which is very taboo in his society. He is not known to be gay. He consents to the marriage because he has no other alternative. But because of something that happens very early on in the story, he is outed and he is disowned by his father, but he continues to go to the foreign country to get married because it turns out that the woman has a brother who would happily marry a man. So they continue with the marriage. When he arrives in the foreign country, they have very different social norms, and marriage between like same-sex couples is completely normalized. So it's like this huge culture shock for him. Everything that he had to hide about himself, he no longer has to hide, but he has complicated feelings about that, of course. And when he arrives there, he is dealing with an issue which I will talk about shortly, but also somebody's trying to kill him. There are mysterious violent acts happening there, something going on with the internal politics of the family that he's married into, and it's a big mystery that they spend the entire book trying to unravel, like what conspiracy is going on here. I ate this up. Like it had good characters, good banter, it had mysteries and conspiracies and lots of stuff to just figure out, and it had that slowly building romance, and I loved it. The interesting thing to me about this book is that like it has a really huge content warning on this, and I think it's worth talking about that because this could very easily be billed as a cute, slow burn fantasy romance, and it has an element to it which I think some people who read romance would never want to read in their romance, and that is sexual assault. So this is not a spoiler by any means. There is a content warning in the book, and this happens in the first couple of chapters, but one of the main characters, Velison, is raped in the beginning of the story. It is on page, it's pretty graphic, and the rest of the story is him dealing with being a survivor of sexual assault, what that has done to him mentally, his incredible fear of being married off, and he has no idea if he's going to be raped by his spouse. It's just, it's in his head this entire time throughout the story, and it's part of the plot. Dealing with that, dealing with his rapist is part of the plot. I really dislike reading about rape and sexual assault in books, especially if it is on page. When I went into this, I didn't really know that it was going to happen, so I read it, and it's disturbing, but there's something about this story, the way that it deals with the subject matter. I feel like it was kind of cathartic in the way that this survivor of sexual assault is believed, and it is dealt with. He is given some level of justice and healing, and I think that's what made a lot of it just work. It's satisfying to read. That being said, I think there are a lot of people who this will sound like your kind of book, but that content will be extremely off-putting. So I've seen like other reviews of this like on Goodreads and stuff where people have very different opinions on it based on this content warning. So I would say like go into it knowing about that. It surprised me but that it didn't bother me so much, but I think that it's just that it was dealt with well, and it was actually integrated well with the story and with the characters and character development and all of that. So yeah. Like I said, I ate this book up. I read almost the entire 500-page book in a single day. And I don't know if there's going to be anything else in this world. I kind of hope that there will be, because I really loved the world building. I think there's so much to explore in this world with the politics, the international politics of it, the magic and everything. Just really, really fascinating. So yeah, there you go. One of my favorite reads of the year. Why am I always like most incoherent about books that I really enjoy? That is it for me this week. Those are the things that I read over the past 2 weeks actually. So let me know if you have also read any of these. If you want to talk about them, leave me a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I will talk to you again soon about more books. And until then, bye.